Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another video. Today is day 65. Plan. I'll be reading 1 Samuel, chapters 21 through 24. So yeah, um, I said like a moment. Okay, 1 Samuel, chapter 21. David flees to Nob. David went to the priest Ahimelech at Nob. Ahimelech was afraid to meet David, so he said to him, "Why are you alone and no one's with you?" David answered the priest Ahimelech, "The king gave me a mission, but he told me don't let anyone know anything about the mission or I'm sending you on or what I've done ordered you to do. I stationed my young men at a certain place. Now what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can be found." The priest told him, "There's no ordinary bread on hand. However, there is concentrated bread, but the young men may eat it, only if they keep themselves from women." David answered him, "I swear that women are being kept from us. As always, when I go into battle, the young men's bodies are concentrated even on an ordinary mission. So, of course, their bodies are concentrated today." So the priest gave him the consecrated bread, for there was no bread there except the bread of the presence that the Lord had removed from the presence that had been removed from the presence of the Lord. When the bread was removed, he replaced it with more bread. When I saw servants detained before the Lord and was there that day, his name was Yog the Edomite, sheep, all the shepherds. David said to Ahimelech, "Do you have a spear or sword on hand? I didn't even bring my sword or my weapon since the king's mission was urgent." The priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here, wrapped in cloth behind the ephod. If you want to take it for yourself, then take it, for there isn't another one here." "There is none like it," David said. "Give it to me." David flees to Gath. David fled that day from Saul's presence and went to King Achish from the Gath. But a servant said to him, "Isn't David the king of the land? Don't they sing about him during their dances? Saul has killed thousands, but David's killed his tens of thousands." David took this to his heart and became very afraid of King Achish of Gath, so he pretended to be insane in the presence. He acted like a madman around him, scribbling on the doors of the city gate and letting saliva run down his beard. "Luke, you can see this man is crazy," Achish said to the servants. "Why do you bring him to me? Do I have shortage of crazy people that you brought this one act crazy around me? Is this going to come into my house?" Chapter 22. Saul's increasing paranoia. So David left Gath and took refuge in the camp of Adullam. When David's brothers and fathers, whole family heard, they went down and joined him there. In addition, every man who was desperate, in debt, or discontented railed about around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were there. From there, David went to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and my mother stay with you until I know what God will do for me." So he left them in the care of the king of Moab, and they stayed with him the whole time David was in the stronghold. And then the prophet Gad said to David, "Don't stay in the stronghold, and leave and return to the land of Judah." So David left and went to the forest in Hereth. Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered. At that time Saul was in Gibeah, sitting under a tamarisk tree at the high place. His spear was in his hand, and his servants were standing round him. Saul said to his servants, "Listen, men of Benjamin, is Jesse's son going to give you all your fields and vineyards? Do you think he'll make up commanders of thousands, commanders of hundreds? That's why all of you have conspired against me. Nobody tells me when my own son makes a covenant with Jesse's son. None of you cares about me or tells me that my son has stirred up my own servant to lay an ambush for me, as is the case today." And Nog the Edomite, who was in charge of Saul's servants, answered, "I saw Jesse's son come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him and gave him provisions. He also gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Slaughter of the priest. The king sent messengers to summon the priests of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, his father's whole family, who were priests in Nob. They all came to the king. Then Saul said, "Listen, son of Ahitub, I am at your service, my lord," he said. Saul asked him, Why did you and Jesse's son conspire against me? You gave him bread and sword and inquired of God for him, so he could rise up against me and lay in ambush, as is the case today. Ahimelech replied to the king, who among all your servants is as faithful as David? He is the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and honored in your house. Was today the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Please don't let the king make an accusation because your servant or any of father's family, for your servant didn't have any idea about all this. They said to the king, you will die, Ahimelech, and your father's whole family. And the king ordered the guards standing beside him, turn them to kill the priests of the Lord because they sided with David, for they knew he was fleeing, but they didn't tell me. But the king's servants would not lift a hand to execute the priests of the Lord. So the king said to Doeg, go and execute the priests. So Doeg the Edomite went and executed the priest himself. On that day he killed 85 men who wore linen ephods. He also struck down Nob, the city of the priests, with the sword, both men and women, infants and nursing babies, oxen, donkeys, and sheep. However, one of the sons of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, escaped. His name was Abiathar, and he fled to David. Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priest of the Lord. Then David said to Ahiathar, I knew that Doeg the Edomite was there that day, and he was for sure to report to Saul. I myself am responsible for the lives of everyone in your father's family. Stay with me, don't be afraid, for the one who wants to take my life wants to take your life. You will be safe with me. 23. Deliverance at Keilah. It was reported to David, look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and raiding the threshing floors. So David inquired of the Lord, should I launch an attack against these Philistines? The Lord answered David, launch an attack against the Philistines and rescue Keilah. But David's men said to him, look, we're afraid here in Judah. How much more will it go to Keilah against Philistine forces? Once again David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered him, go at once over to Keilah, and I will hand over the Philistines over to you. Then David and all his men went to Keilah, fought against the Philistines, drove their livestock away, and inflicted heavy losses on them. So David rescued the inhabitants of Keilah. Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, and he brought an ephod with him. When it was reported to Saul that David had gone to Keilah, he said, God has handed him over to me. He has trapped himself by entering the town with barred gates. Then Saul summoned all the troops to go to war at Keilah and besiege David and his men. When David learned that Saul was plotting evil against him, he said to the priest Abiathar, bring the ephod. Then David said, Lord God of Israel, your servant has reliable information. Saul intends to come to Keilah and destroy the town because of me. Will citizens of Keilah hand him over to me? Will Saul come down on as your servant has heard? Lord God of Israel, please tell your servant. The Lord answered, he will come down. Then David asked, will citizens of Keilah hand me and my men over to Saul? They will, the Lord responded. So David and his men, numbering about 600, left Keilah at once and moved from place to place. It was reported to Saul that David had escaped from Keilah. He called off the expedition. David then stayed in the wilderness strongholds, in the hill country of the wilderness of Sif. Saul searched for him every day, but God did not hand David over to him. The renewed covenant. David was in the wilderness of Sif in Horesh when he saw that Saul had come out to take his life. Then Saul's son Jonathan came to David in Horesh and encountered him in his faith in God, saying, don't be afraid, my father Saul will never lay a hand on you. You yourself will be king over Israel. I'll be your second in command. Even my father Saul knows it's true. Then the two of them made a covenant in the Lord's presence. Afterward, David remained in Horesh while Jonathan went home. David's narrow escape. Some Sivites came up to Saul at Gibeah and said, David is hiding among us in the strongholds in Horesh in the hill of Hachilah south of Jeshimon. Now whenever the king wants to come here, let him come down. Our part will be to hand him over to the king. May by you be blessed by the Lord, replied Saul, for you have shown concern for me. Go and check again, investigate where he goes and who has seen him there. Tell him he is extremely cunning. Investigate all the places he hides. Then come back to me with accurate information. I'll go with you. It turns out he really is in the region. I'll search for him among all the clans of Judah, so that once to Sif ahead Saul. Then David and his men were in the wilderness near Man in the Arabah, south of Jeshimon. and Saul and his men went to look for him. David was told about it. He went down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. Saul heard of this and pursued David there. Saul went along the side of the mountain, and David and his men went along the other side. Even though David was hurrying to get away from Saul, Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture them. The messenger came to Saul, saying, "Come quickly, because the Philistines have raided the land." So Saul broke off the pursuit of David and went to engage the Philistines. Therefore, that place is named the Rock of Separation. From there, David went up and stayed at the strongholds of En Gedi. Chapter 24, the final chapter for today. David spares Saul. When Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, "David is in the wilderness near En Gedi." So Saul took 3,000 of Israel's fit young men and went to look for David with his men in front of the rocks of wild goats. And Saul went to the sheep pens along the road. The cave was there, and he went in to relieve himself. David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave, so I said to him, "Look, this is the day that the Lord told you about. I'll hand your enemy over to you, so you can go wherever you do decide." And David got up and secretly cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, "I swear before the Lord, I will never do such a thing to my Lord. The Lord's anointed, I will never lift my hand against him, since the Lord has anointed." These words David pursued his men, and he did not let them rise up against Saul. Then Saul left the cave and went on his way. After that, David got up, went out of the cave, and called Saul, "My lord the king." And Saul looked behind him, and David knelt low, his face to the ground, and paid homage. David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of the people who say, 'Look, David intends to harm you'? You can see with your own eyes that the Lord handed you over to me today in the cave. Some advised me to kill you, but I took pity on you, said, 'I won't lift my hands against my Lord, since he is the Lord's anointed.' Look, my father, look at the corner of your robe in my hand, for I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. Recognize that I committed no crime or rebellion. I haven't sinned against you, even though you are hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord take vengeance on you for me, but my hand will never be against you." As old Proverbs says, wickedness comes from wicked people. My hand will never be against you. Who has the king of Israel come after? What are you chasing after? A dead dog? A single flea? May the Lord be judge and decide between you and me. May he take notice and plead my case and deliver me from you. When David finished saying these things to him, Saul replied, "Is that your voice, David, my son?" And Saul wept loudly. And he said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have done what is good to me, though I have done what is evil to you. You yourself have told me today what is good you did for me, when the Lord handed you over to me. You didn't kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him go unharmed? May the Lord repay you with good for what you've done for me today. Now I know for certain you will be king, and the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hand. Therefore swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family." So David swore to Saul. Then Saul went back home, and David and his men went up from the stronghold. That is all the reading for today. So those are some really, really interesting stuff that I just read. It starts out talking about how David flees to Nob, and the priest Ahimelech, I don't know how to say his name very well. It was a priest, and David asked for bread, but he didn't have any bread aside from the special priestly, the dedicated bread to God. And so only the men that haven't led themselves to women were allowed to eat it. And so they gave him bread. But David also asked for a sword. They had no sword aside from the sword of that was Goliath, that David killed Goliath. And so they let David have it to use, and then he went on his way. And so David flees off to Gath, but Saul becomes to be more and more paranoid, and so eventually, he has all the priests slaughtered or just murdered because he became paranoid that they were trying to help a rebellion, all that stuff. And then eventually, he goes to deliverance at Keilah, and so they're covenant guarded. And so David had a narrow escape multiple times, between the mountains, both on either side. Then eventually, David spares Saul because he sees him. They were hiding out in a cave, and then Saul comes to relieve himself in that cave. And so David sneaks up, but instead of killing him, he cuts off a corner of his robe. And so when Saul had left, he went out and showed him that corner of the robe and basically said, even though you are saying I'm planning to kill you and all that stuff, like I even had a corner of your robe, but I didn't lay a hand on you. And so Saul kind of realized everything he'd been doing wrong, and it kind of ends off there. So, yeah, that is all for today. I hope you had a good day so far. Have a great rest of the day. Remember, God loves you, and goodbye. Goodbye. I said that a little too early. I always forget you have to push end screen twice. Goodbye. I did the 2-finger click by accident.